You could be working with 5 people in some crummy little office in some city somewhere. As soon as you have 5 people together, power games occur. Somebody thinks they're the boss. Somebody thinks they're number one. Everybody else has to play around them in some way or another. So the game always kind of forms in the same way. I read a lot of history. This isn't just for my research for these books. Well before I ever wrote my first book, I was continually reading books on history. I liked certain periods, obviously. I studied ancient in college. That was my major. So I'm fascinated with all aspects of ancient Greece. And I'm very interested in the Renaissance and the time of Machiavelli. And I'm obviously very, very interested in French history, particularly the period of Louis XIV, etc. And so, when you read books about our past, there's a certain kind of dynamic that occurs with power. It's very simple. There's a king or a queen or an emperor, and they have a court, and the court surrounds them. And the court is filled with all of these people, princesses, dukes, duchesses, etc. And they're all vying to get closer to the king. They're all kissing up to him or to the queen, trying to get closer, trying to get access to the king. And in doing so, they have all kinds of strange behavior. They pretend to love all of his ideas. They imitate him. They wear the same clothes. They mimic all of his ideas and fashions, etc. All to get the attention of the king and to draw some power. And so this kind of game evolved in these different courts going back thousands of years. And the game was, if you appeared too aggressive, if you were trying too hard to get ahead inside the court, you would look ugly. You would look inelegant, and people wouldn't like you, and the king wouldn't like you. So you had to be very indirect. You had to be very, very shrewd. You had to do what Napoleon counseled people to do, and that is to put his iron fist inside a velvet glove. So you hit people, and they feel the soft, velvety touch of it, but there's an iron fist going in. So you had to do all of these kind of shrewd little games to get ahead. So I'm reading all of these books about that because it fascinates me. And here I am in the work world, in New York, in journalism, in London, in television, in Paris, working at a hotel, in Los Angeles, working in Hollywood, in Italy, working on some silly project I won't even talk about. Here we are in the 21st century, or back then in the 20th century, I'm sorry. And here we are. So modern, so sophisticated, so technological, etc. The same goddamn game is going on. There's a boss who's just like a king or a queen or an emperor, and everybody is sucking up to him. Everyone's playing the same game, trying to get attention, trying to be clever, trying to get attention, but not offending the other people. Everyone is like mimicking the boss, saying how wonderful your idea is. Yes, that's fantastic. I love it. You're great. Okay, the same game, the same court game. People aren't wearing powdered wigs and long, gowns and hair up to here, but it's the same thing going on. They may not be thrown into prison and have their head cut off for a mistake. Instead, they're fired or they're tortured in the media for something that they did. But the game is the same. And so no one writes about that. No one talks about that. No one talks about this kind of ancient dynamic of being a courtier in a court as if that is our reality. But that is our reality because that is human nature. Once there is a person of power or people of power, something forms around them where everybody has to try and gain their attention, suck up to them without appearing to suck up to them, etc., etc., etc. It's like chess. The board game of chess might have looked different 2,500 years ago, or however, when it first invented. I don't know when exactly. Might have had pieces of carved wood that looked really weird and on sand with spaces carved out, and now we've got high-tech computer versions of it. But the game is the same. The rules are the same. The players are the same. That's what it is. That's what power is. It was so obvious to me as I was in Italy in 1995 on that job whose name I won't mention. It was so obvious to me that this person who was running the company that we were working for was just like a prince out of 16th century Italy, Florence or whatever. He was just the same, but no one talks about it. It made me angry. And so I wrote, based on that, the 48 Laws of Power, in which I tried to reveal this dynamic of the game playing that goes on, all of the politicking. And so the month of April is to kind of introduce you to this concept that might not seem so obvious to you, but I think will be very helpful to view the dynamic of the power games that are going on in front of you in your very face. And the thing is, you don't have to be working for IBM or for Microsoft or whatever, where there's 20,000 people. You can be working with 5 people in some crummy little office in some city somewhere. As soon as you have 5 people together, power games occur. Somebody thinks they're the boss. Somebody thinks they're number one. Everybody else has to play around them in some way or another. So the game always kind of forms in the same way. You don't think about that because you're trapped in this modern concept of, oh, we're so democratic, we're so fair, we're so sophisticated, we're so goddamn woke, we're so far beyond that world. Well, I'm sorry to say we're not one iota beyond that world. We're still trapped in something that was occurring thousands of years ago, because that's human nature. So I wanted you to see the people around you playing this game, constantly trying to not appear to be too aggressive, too ambitious, but at the same time doing all kinds of maneuvers to get the attention of the king or the queen, to kind of play to their best side, to try and downplay the other courtiers. Everybody is scheming for position, and it'll kind of alter your way of looking at the work world. Instead of being so naive, instead of falling for the illusion that we're all so democratic and fair, you will understand that there are some people who are manipulators. There are some people who are passive aggressors, who may not appear to be interested in power, but are still playing all kinds of weaselly little games where they're pretending to be so spiritual and so nice, but at the same time, they're some of the worst manipulators among them. On and on and on. There are these types. They recur. And this month of April is going to alter your way of thinking, so you begin to open your eyes up to the political games that human beings inevitably play when there's any group of 3 or 4 or 5 people together. So that's what that month I think will instruct you in.
Power and Black progress. Blacks and power are the oil and water of American politics. Power plays a critical role in Black and white race relationships in America. Though we cannot see, taste, or touch it, we can sense its presence and attest to its strength and potency. It affects all manner of human relations. Power in and of itself is neutral. Only the motives and purposes of the power users make power good or bad. It has been abusively used to create divisions between Black and white people around the world. A racial and ethnic hierarchy disproportionately distributed nearly 100% control and ownership of wealth, natural resources, and privileges to whites at the top of the social order, while Blacks assigned to the lowest level were disproportionately burdened with poverty, powerlessness, and social exclusion. The problems created by these power disparities spawned racial inequities, and only power realignment can correct. Dominant society used its power to label Blacks lazy, ignorant, and criminal, then created laws that denied them jobs, education, and justice. And though the most insidious acts of all, dominant society used its social powers to assign an intensely negative human worth to Black skin color that caused millions of Blacks to fear each other and hate themselves. So, what is power? So we heard Robert Greene talk about power, but let's let Dr. Anderson define power. Then we're going to get back to Robert Greene and tie it together, right? Power is defined by Webster's dictionary as the ability to bring about fulfillment of one's desires and needs. The ability to bring about fulfillment of one's desires and needs. Behavioral scientists add another nuance to the meaning by including in the definition the notion of one entity imposing its will on another. Along the same line, Thomas Sowell, an economist, defines the term power in a much broader sense in this book, The Economics and the Politics of Race. He has to qualify that power is not simply the ability to get something done, but to get it done despite the resistance and opposition of others. It is the last definition of power that is used in this book. Power is not simply the ability to get something done, but to get it done despite the resistance and opposition of others. A true power holder can enforce its decisions and will on the less powerful by applying or threatening to apply penalties of force, or it can elect to secure compliance to its wishes and decisions by providing or offering rewards. The final decision on the use of any particular form of social control belongs to the power holder. Those holding power have used it effectively in organizing and controlling blacks to the benefit of the larger society. Power has determined the quality of black life. Social powers external to the black communities have controlled and shaped black people's lives and behavior for more than 4 centuries. The power of dominant society determined whether blacks would walk proudly as free Bushmen of West Africa or toil in chains as slaves among the bushes of America. Dominant society's power made blacks the economic locomotive engine that drove civilizations around the world, but assigned blacks to the caboose so that they could not enjoy the fruits of their own labor. Welcome back. Welcome back. Welcome back. Happy Monday. Welcome back to On the Shoulders of Giants. I am Joseph Ward. I am continuing my reading of Dr. Claude Anderson's book, Black Labor, White Wealth, The Search for Power and Economic Justice. And this is chapter 2, Power and Black Progress. And I started with the video of Robert Greene. And as you saw in the clip, Robert Greene is the author of the 48 Laws of Power. He's also authored The Art of Seduction, the 33 Strategies of War, the 50th Law. His latest book is The Daily Laws, the Laws of Human Nature, The Art of Seduction, all those things, all these books Robert Greene have written. But talking about power, one of my favorite subjects to talk about. And I know a lot of people don't like power, don't like to talk about it, but I love talking about power. And I love to see how power is formed and manifested and used, right? So Black people around the world are powerless. We are powerless for many reasons, but one of the main reasons is the inability to properly defend ourselves against those who oppress us. So because we can't defend ourselves properly, we can't defend the resources, whether that's human resources or natural resources or even intellectual resources. We cannot defend them. We cannot create them, hold on to them, control them, and use them for our own benefit, because there is an opposite force that is stronger. And remember, the ability to get something done despite the resistance and the opposition of others. So despite all of the resistance and the opposition that Black people throughout time, throughout the world and now have given the oppressors, white supremacy and white oppression have still been able to reign supreme over us. And we like to say that white supremacy isn't real and they don't have a place of power over us, but show me the real actual power that we have over ourselves or any other group or any land resources or anything, even on the continent of Africa. Most African people on the continent of Africa don't really have power. They are subjected, like us, and many of us are subjected to the power of those who are in control. Now, one way to get from up under the thumb and to become powerful is, first of all, change your mindset. Change your mindset to stop seeing ourselves as the oppressed. Stop seeing ourselves as those who are supposed to be on the bottom. We've been relegated to the bottom. We're not supposed to be on the bottom, right? Change our mindset, organize, get a code, get active. Change our mindset, organization, code, action, right? And so, but we also need to understand our opposition. To fully defeat our opposition, we need to understand our opposition. So that's why today we're going to explore power the way we're going to explore power. So we can learn more about power, the different kinds of power, how power is yielded against us, and how we possibly can use power to help ourselves. We like to talk like we have power. And yes, Black power was a statement in the 60s and 70s. But just a statement. Where is the true actualization of power. And that's where we need to get to. So let's get into it. Picking back up. Oh, yeah. Chapter 2 goes from page 28 to 40. From 28 to 44. Chapter 2 goes from 28 to 44. I'm picking up on page 29. The last paragraph, kinds of power. To advance the self-interest of an individual or a group, humans use numerous kinds of power. The most common forms of power in black and white relationships are group power, institutional power, wealth power, numerical power, political power, and voting power. The dominant society uses power mechanisms such as government, private corporations, religion, and social institutions to perpetuate its self-interest and secure and maintain control of power-building resources. Black labor was a white wealth builder and therefore a power-generating resource that dominated society greatly valued and manipulated to maintain the power generated by black labor. White society used whatever means necessary to keep blacks powerless and under control because blacks were the engine. They were the power behind the force or behind the labor. White people were the power behind getting black people to become the labor, but black people were the power behind the labor. But it was a lesser form of power, though an important form of power, because black people had the power over the land as far as the crops and things that they planted to manipulate the land so the crops could grow. But it was a limited form of power while being dominated by a more powerful group, which is the white supremacists. So what is group power? The United States constitutional spirit of individualism, notwithstanding group power, was the true and base origin of all rights in American society. Group power is typically manifested when a collection of individuals organize and pool together resources to achieve common goals and shared benefits. Such action is the primary instrument for securing objects of interest and power. In the founding years of this nation, European whites built their dreams of becoming a wealthy aristocracy within a capitalistic democracy on the backs of black slaves. The collective power resources of many people, nations, religions, and organizations were aligned and concertedly used to exploit blacks. Their strategy illustrates that group power requires general agreement among the participating members in a core issue, but power evolves from the group's collective motives and goals. And that's one of our main problems. We don't have collective motives and goals. You have individual motives and goals, not collective motives and goals. And that's one of our problems. Group power is something we will never achieve en masse. But as you've seen in the video with Robert Greene, group power can be 5 people. So that's why, nowadays we preach the critical masses, because that is a form of power. Now, is it enough power? That is the question. The question isn't just can power be formed or is power present? Is it enough power? Is this power suffice? Can this power overpower something else, this other force? Like when the immovable object meets the unstoppable force, which one wins? So institutional power, right? Institutions arise and exist only by means of group behavior. So in order to have institutional power, you have to have group power. Institutions center their activities around fundamental social, cultural, academic, racial, religious, and financial needs. They permanently unite a group of people in a cooperative task. Once decisions have been made by the larger society, institutions use their resources to confirm and explain why the larger society made such decisions, and occasionally institutions are called upon to play leadership roles. Institutions can acquire a variety of powers due to their non-biological permanency. If financially supported, they survive aging, political shifts, and drastic social changes. An institution's power are in proportion to and may be measured by its ability to create, store, and circulate data, develop and influence public policies, aggregate people around issues, network with other institutions and organizations, and stimulate the development of leadership. Institutions can do all of these things well, become very powerful. The greatest limitation of institutional power is the lack of transferability of its powers to a particular individual at a particular time on a particular issue. This institutional limitation promotes institutional leadership instead of charismatic personalities. Considering Black America's dire dilemma, the formation of a network of intellectual institutions is imperative for building power bases. I'm gonna read this part again. Institutions can acquire a variety of powers due to their non-biological permanency. If financially supported, they survive aging, political shifts, and drastic social changes. Now, listen now. An institution's power are in proportion to and may be measured by its ability to create, store, and circulate data, develop and influence public policies, aggregate people around issues, network with other institutions and organizations, and stimulate the development of leadership. Institutions can do all of these things well. Institutions who do all these things well become very powerful, or groups of people who do all these things very well become powerful. The greatest limitation of institutional power is the lack of transferability of its power to a particular individual at a particular time on a particular issue. And if we have any type of power, it's very, very, very limited power that's not transferable. That's why there's no building up on power for us. It just is. We are here scrambling. The impact of institutionalized power on Blacks. The superior group power of whites influence all the institutions they built: government, schools, businesses, church, and social organizations. Institutions were the means of inculcating values that would perpetually maintain the self-interest of European whites and their descendants. Thus, institutional power has become a major factor in maintaining the power imbalance between the Blacks and whites. Government was one of the most powerful tools of the dominant society. Without the support and power of government, the white society could not have enslaved and segregated Blacks for centuries. Read that again. Government was one of the most powerful tools of the dominant society. Government was one of the most powerful tools of the dominant society. Without the support and power of government, the white society could not have enslaved and segregated Blacks for centuries. Government, for example, enacted laws that forbade schools to accept Black children and made it illegal to teach a Black person to read or write. Initially, all former religious denominations accepted the abuse of Blacks and even offered biblical justification for it. Through government, businesses, churches, and other institutional power holders, white society controlled the wealth, power, and resources. They also controlled Blacks, their primary labor source. That's the impact of institutional power. Because we have these institutions to back us, to reinforce the power, we are in a more powerful position. I have the ability to tell you what you can and can't do, to bar you from this place, to tell you you can't live here, to tell you that you can't learn, you can't earn, you can't make a living for yourself. Institutional power is real. So when we're thinking about power as Black people, we need to realize that when we're talking about us being powerful, who or what do we have the ability to manipulate against their will or against its will? Most of us don't even have the power to properly train our dogs. Economic power has always been the greatest source of power for individuals and groups in America. Individuals who merge their political or financial resources into a group can become very powerful in a capitalistic democracy. For instance, Jews and white Anglo-Saxon Protestants, or WASP, have uncontested control over a disproportionate share of America's wealth. Wealth gives them options. They use their wealth as political tools to open doors to new economic opportunities for their respective groups, to punish other groups, and to block the doors of opportunity. Obviously, all whites do not possess great wealth and power, but because of their strong sense of racial cohesion and their compulsive belief in keeping economic resources within their communities, the resources of wealthy and powerful whites stay within the white community. They rarely help non-whites, especially blacks. Chancellor Williams, in this book, which we just got through reading, The Destruction of Black Civilization, wrote, Caucasians will wage frightful wars against other Caucasians, but will quickly unite as though by instinct against non-whites, not only in wars, but in international policies. They have developed a kind of built-in solidarity in their relations with non-Caucasian people. This fact, as much as anything else, helps to explain their position as masters of the world, right? Working together, understanding how to come together and use the collective power, right? Together, wealth and politics represent a potent combination of powers because they are versatile. By working together, they can produce other forms of power. Wealth and politics. You don't just get over in politics just by sheer will and voting. You got to have something else, right? They are the root cause of racial stratification, exploitation, and unequal distribution of resources. In the present social structure, maldistribution guarantees that America will never be an equal opportunity society. Those who hold a disproportionate share of wealth and power are not inclined to share or relinquish those tools. In combination, political power and wealth become practically synonymous in a capitalistic democracy. Since wealth remains concentrated and rigidly locked in the hands of whites, black progress will be difficult. As far back as 1970, the richest 10% of white households has held half of the nation's wealth. By the eve of the Civil War, 1% of the most wealthy whites owned 24% of the nation's wealth. 100 years later, in 1969, they owned 24.9%. During the very same time periods, black wealth roamed between 1% and 2%. It is astounding that the percentages of wealth controlled by whites or blacks have not changed throughout the nation's involvements in the Civil War, emancipation of the slaves, and Reconstruction, World War I, the Great Depression, World War II, the Korean War, Vietnam War, and the Civil Rights Movement, which has followed by a second Reconstruction period. Through it all, the wealthy white elite collectively held on to everything. Now we're getting into numerical population power, but we don't control our own wealth. We don't have wealth. I think at the max now, last time I looked it up, if that source was correct, we are at like 4.2% of the nation's wealth. If that, 13% of the population, 4.2% of the wealth. We have no power. We have no legs to stand on. We can't do nothing to defend ourselves. It has to grow, but we have to have the will to make it grow. We can't just keep talking about it. So let's get into another important subject of power, numerical power, because we don't understand. That's why it's important for black people to not kill each other and for black people to not make babies that are not wanted, so those babies won't be, eliminated before even being born, right? Why has the black population my whole life, and even longer than that, been stagnant around 12 to 15%? The black population in America has been consistently stagnant. Do y'all not see something? Right? Numerical power. So the Hispanics have passed us in population. The whites have always been greater than us in population. And I'm sure the Asians out there having a whole lot of sex and producing babies too. We are making babies, but we are having a lot of elimination of babies. And after we're born, we are the greatest eliminators of ourselves. Whether it's our own destruction of our body through unhealthy means of living or even just being violent toward ourselves. Numerical power is important. So let's get into it. In a democratic society, which we live in, or we live in a democratic republic, but we have a democratic voting process, right? In a democratic society, the numerical majority wins, rules, and decides. The numerical majority wins, rules, and decides. We're only 13% of the population. We are not the numerical majority, right? The theoretical rights of a minority may or may not be respected, especially if they are a planned minority. Numerical population power is the power that comes to those groups that acquire power through their sheer size. The black population peaked in the 1750s when slaves and free blacks accounted for approximately 33% of the total population. In the 1750s, when America was still growing, before America even became America, right? 33% of the population on this land, right? The high numerical strength of blacks caused fear and concern among whites. They feared the loss of their own numerical power. Word of black Haitians' successful slave revolt in the 1790s had spread across America and reportedly ignited several slave revolts in the southern states. The first U.S. Congress enacted the first naturalization law that declared America to be a nation for whites only. This Naturalization Act and other income incentives attracted a massive influx of legal and illegal European ethnics, followed by Asian and Hispanic immigrants a century later. What did I just get through saying, right? This immigration quota on blacks remained zero until the total percentages of the population declined to 9%. By making blacks a planned numerical minority, white society assured its dominance in a democratic society where the majority always wins. And we were planned to be on the bottom, and its strategies put in place to keep us on the bottom. The Asians are coming for us when it comes to population. They're coming for us. Whites have passed us, Hispanics have passed us. The Asians have passed us in wealth. They're coming for us in population. Soon we're going to truly be a true fourth class group of people, numerically and economically. And it's going to be rough. Political power and its supportive concepts. Political power comprises all those activities that relate to the authoritative use of public and governmental powers under existing traditions, laws, and constitutional authorities of government. But political power can be acquired either through or outside of the normal process of elective or appointed office. Political power is an important power for a depressed group to have because politics is the process that typically decides who shall have what benefits in life. However, groups aspiring to gain political power can only attain and use it if they have economic power as well. Economic power allows a group to possess and exercise control over its own power rather than seeking access to another person's power. Political power can only obtain and be used if they have economic power. We can't just vote ourselves into power, but we haven't learned that lesson yet. So, speaking of voting, the illusionary power. Voting in publicly held elections is a key source of power in any democratic society if the voting groups have certain cultural forms of power. Certain collateral forms of power. Voting in publicly held elections is a key source of power in any democratic society if the voting groups have a certain collateral form of power. Emancipation and amendments to the Constitution give blacks the legal right to vote. Probably the only instance in which blacks exercise true group power is through black voting. But remember, it says it gave blacks the legal right to vote. You have to have power to give somebody something, right? But without wealth, numerical, or social accountability, any of those powers, voting becomes a weak form of power for blacks. Voting rights have pacified blacks by allowing them to make choices, but never decisions. They could only vote their choice for candidates about whom the dominant white society had already made decisions. The weakness of blacks' voting power was demonstrated when a white anti-Reconstruction backlash in the South took voting rights from blacks within a generation after they were granted in the mid-1860s. It took nearly another century to restore blacks' access to the ballot box. If I can give it to you, I can take it from you. Since the 1960s, blacks' consistent level of voter participation indicates that they steadfastly believe that their voting power can significantly change their life conditions. This will not happen. Though much effort and expense go into black voter registration and get out and vote projects, blacks have successfully put black and white candidates into high governmental offices by voting in blocks. But blacks have failed to buttress their own block voting with other forms of group power building activity. Voting itself is limited, transitory form of power that ends when the polls close. With the block vote, blacks may cast the decisive votes and put a candidate into office, but they cannot make the new office holder deliver. Threats can be made, but voting power cannot be exercised outside of the ballot box. Since elections are held every 2 or 4 years, the black electorate can be ignored or further damaged by those they put in public office. And so we believe that our form of engaging in the voting process is helpful because we keep doing it. Keep voting for the same people the same way, getting the same outcomes, and doing the same complaining. It's cyclical. Even when blacks vote blacks into public office, their ballot box victories do not necessarily translate into improved social or economic conditions for black people. Some black elected officials like Tiffany Henyard have been reluctant to initiate programs solely targeted to blacks. Oh, that's a whole bunch of black politics then, even Kamala and Obama and them, right? Many have been convinced that we live in a colorblind society or are simply afraid to push for black causes. Thus, black political power has yet to become an effective strategy for getting vitally needed resources to black communities. Though the rule of politics is something for something, black Americans have never specifically rewarded for their overwhelming support for candidates of public office. Black officials are skittish about using the powers of their offices to specifically address the needs of black communities because they are concerned about generating a white backlash. It is easier for them to propose or support programs that are ambiguously designed to assist everybody rather than just blacks. For their political support, blacks have always been deemed quid pro quo or something in return for their votes. Some black office holders, like their white political counterparts, practice trickle-down politics. They demonstrate their productivity to blacks by pointing to legislation and programs that they supported for civil rights, poor people, minorities, and homeless immigrants, prison reform, and public works. Few can point to a program or policy that was created specifically and solely to relieve the horrendous conditions in black communities. I was listening to a video the other day, and I was talking about black men not going to college and the different things that black people that different policies and things that Biden and them have done, and they talked about policies that were enacted for everybody, and just because the student loan forgiveness, they act like the student loan forgiveness was something that was specifically for black people. We don't get it. That's why we don't have no power. The importance of power for black people. Without increased wealth and political power, blacks cannot correct the multitude of social ills that have become embedded in the fabric of their communities. Nor can they acquire the power they need through a shared power agreement with the dominant white society. The dominant society will not permit blacks to use the power within white institutions to improve social and economic conditions within black communities, especially since whites as a group generally have neither the interest nor incentive for correcting the candidates. Consequently, blacks must develop their own group institutional powers, then remedy the inequities that have been historically imposed upon them. Progress has eluded black people because they have been powerless to get what they wanted and needed, and they have not been able to stop the others from depriving them of their necessities of life. Since slavery and the 1954 desegregation decision, blacks have experienced political and civil rights improvements. Blacks have relatively free access to voting booths and can vote for any candidate that the power structure offers. They have access to public restrooms, lunch counters, and the front seat of any bus. However, civil rights did not bring about much change in their ability to pay for the best facilities or seats. Civil rights have been ineffective for most blacks in terms of improving substandard housing, lowering their unemployment rates, transforming dysfunctional schools, removing massive removing massive poverty, reducing high crime, or eliminating social rejection by whites, Asians, Hispanics, and other ethnics. Blacks' social and economic progress will come about when blacks master the power and the commitment to bring forth positive change. Nobody's going to give it to you. If they have to give it to you, you don't have it. I often hear a lot of black women saying that white men gave black men power. If they gave it to us, we don't have power. Power cannot be given. It can only be taken. It can only be used. You can't give somebody power. If you can give it to me, you can take it from me. So now we're talking about black self-empowerment, right? Self-empowerment is the most effective, if not the only road open for blacks to reach racial competitiveness. But the first issue to resolve is a common understanding of what the term self-empowerment means. Since the 1960s, the term has been used in unclear and even contradictory ways. The American Heritage Dictionary defines empowerment to invest with legal power or to authorize. This definition speaks to institutionalized authorities and power. Quite clearly, this is not what black activists intended when they spoke of empowering black people and black communities in the 1960s. Most commonly, activists were concerned about empowering black people to act in or be in a position to speak for their own people through established systems. Today, it is politically correct to espouse empowerment zones and minority communities throughout the nation. According to one federal official, empowerment zone monies would be invested in infrastructure improvements, and preferential tax incentives would be offered to white businesses in order to attract them to the very same black communities that they began abandoning 30 years ago. How do infrastructure improvements and tax incentives for white wealth holders help blacks? Is the term empowerment zones used to mean self-empowerment? If so, how? Who is really being empowered, and how will what the government proposes to do eradicate black communities' dire conditions? Self-empowerment for blacks can only occur when blacks use all of their available resources to acquire wealth and social power through a comprehensive plan involving all segments of their community. Self-empowerment, the key word is self. A properly developed self-empowerment plan that is supported in principle by all of Black America would change centuries of defined dreams into realized visions. Until Black America collectively aspires to acquire its own power, to alter its marginal conditions, it is highly unlikely that they will ever obtain power. The plan for self-empowerment must begin with a realistic analysis of blacks' assets and lead to the development of strategies to maximize their fullest potential. True empowerment will give blacks new tools and strengths to deal with power imbalances that today promote racism in the court systems, educational institutions, as well as the governmental and private corporate sectors. These entities have no accountability to blacks, even though they exert tremendous power over blacks. They are repositories of the cultural power of whites. They have not changed through the centuries. Thus, they still safeguard the culture, heritage, and social values of the original European settlers. The power was not meant for us. The power, whatever power and power bases that was set up in America, was not meant for us. It was never meant for us. It was meant for those who set the power, the Europeans. So we have to do something different. We have to do something different. So organize. We're always talking about organizing, but we're never doing it. So it's talking about organizing and power will come. A great writer once said, those who the gods will make powerful must first organize. Few words could be truer for blacks. Whether individual blacks are firm believer in the concepts of integration, segregation, and modernization, they must all come together around the goal of improving the living conditions of their race. Although political and other philosophies may Although political and other philosophies may differ, blacks are united by their physical commonality. Divided, they cannot achieve empowerment. They will be unable to make effective decisions about their future. Blacks are no longer in servitude. They have a protected right to exercise their freedom of association. They may freely organize in their own best interests. No other ethnic or racial group will organize nor represent blacks' interests. Society is competitive and becoming increasingly more pluralistic, and there's no incentives for others to assist the black people, right? Because it don't help them. A plan for organizing will not spontaneously materialize. Blacks must organize in order to direct their own future and long-term best interests. In the past, blacks organized to address specific issues that aggrieved them. The resulting organizations therefore lack permanence. When the issue or the leader died, so did the organization, regardless of its effectiveness. Consequently, blacks have historically been caught in the constant cycle of reorganizing. Moreover, more black single-issue organizations have lacked the human or financial capital to provide a forceful, continuous, adaptive, and sustained fight strictly on behalf of blacks. Though Jews are a minority religious group, they can serve as an empowerment model. Jews wield strong blocks of powers, financial and political. Result from their strong sense of community control and wealth and organizational networking. Under their religious identification and sense of togetherness, they aggressively protect their domestic and international togetherness, regardless of criticism. Unlike blacks, they openly and aggressively use their powers to tilt the government and private resources to support issues and programs that benefit Jews. As a religious minority, Jews understand that in a government that is based on their belief of being of and by for the people, that the people are those who can concentrate their power and get what they want. When are we going to learn those lessons? When are we going to learn those lessons? All right, so progress follows empowerment. Do we understand? Or do we just like buzzwords? I think black people just like buzzwords. I don't think we really understand. I think we just like buzzwords for the most part. I think there are minority groups of black people who understand, and the majority of black people just like the buzzwords because it sounds good. For black progress to occur, there must be a fundamental redistribution of wealth and poverty in America. They are burdened by too much planned improvement. They are burdened by too much planned impoverishment. Blacks cannot amass power from their individual holdings of wealth until they organize and develop a plan that will attract and maintain wealth within the black communities. Nearly every black community suffers from historical deprivation, low income levels, and the fight of black capital, and despite income and disposable income to white suburbs. The income that does remain in black communities, usually between 2 and 5%, is insufficient to maintain public service, support businesses, stimulate employment opportunities. It cannot support a political structure dedicated to advancing black interests, nor garner respect from other competitive racial and ethnic groups. It must be clarified that the possession of power does not guarantee wealth, nor does wealth always guarantee power. But contrarily, the lack of power can guarantee poverty, and poverty can always guarantee powerlessness. Controlling resources, maintaining a strong sense of community, and a good organizational plan can produce both power and wealth. It is the American way to organize groups for the purpose of acquiring and wielding power, while most groups realize that their strength is in numbers. Apparently, according to one study, some blacks do not necessarily see strength in grouping themselves with other blacks. In a study of group power, Evans and Giles reported that increasing concentration of blacks served to generate high levels of ethnocentrism among the blacks and raise fears among whites. The lower the percentage of blacks in the workplace, for instance, the lower whites fear that blacks will acquire power. This is an important finding that raises questions about the wisdom of integration. If race relations are based on power, the more blacks integrate into white society, the less chance they will have to acquire power. Blacks will Blacks' willingness to dilute their own strength destroys any perception of their having power. The perception of power is the first step towards the reality of power. So, strategic leveling of the playing field, right? Because it has to be leveled some way, somehow. We have to make a turn here, make a turn there, do this or do that to level the playing field, to get the power, to get the organization, to get the strength, to get to whatever we need to get some kind of change. And what's crazy is all of this information is laid out in front of us and we still refuse to use it. Decision-making through strategic planning is the wave of the future. The decision to organize and plan is the first step towards acquiring power and increased control over resources. By organizing for self-sufficiency, self-empowerment, and racial accountability, Blacks make a conscious decision to both affect and be responsible for their own future. Blacks have paid dearly for the entrusting their future on non-Blacks. If the lesson has been learned, then it is not too late for Blacks to begin leveling the competitive playing field to avoid being locked into a permanent underclass status among racial and ethnic groups in the hyper-competitive decade ahead. And we are close to being locked into that permanent underclass. We don't even realize it. We like to follow screaming Democratic liberal leaders and incompetent Republican conservative leaders, but nobody has led us anywhere productive. Decision-making is based on choosing between the probable and the possible. More specifically, Blacks must identify and choose preferred paths based upon their historical experiences, present conditions, and future needs. If Blacks ignore these factors and continue to be non-involved as a group, it is highly probable that they will get stuck in non-preferred paths in the future. Sounds familiar? More to the point, there is a rule of human behavior that states that if we continue to do the same thing that we have always done, then we will continue to get the same results that we have always gotten. If Blacks want different results and an improved quality of life, they must make different decisions as a group. Once Blacks design a national plan, even if the plan fails initially, Blacks will have at least improved their image as an organized group of people and interested in an improved future. The protracted powerlessness and poverty of Blacks are the result of planning, not chance. The planning was not done by Blacks. In the 130 years that Blacks have had their legal freedom, they have not had collective long-term planning of public policies for Black people. Blacks are concerned about the future of Blacks, of Black youth, but 16 generations of Blacks have had to grow up without the benefit of organized lives within a national plan. Professor Harold Cruz prophesies that without a financial philosophy for coping with American realities of white racism, each successive generation of Black youth will be born, evolve, hesitate, ponder, preserve, and flounder into the blind anonymity of deferred dream and frustrated hopes. Cruz's prophecy is being manifested across the nation in the daily statistics on the Black youth violence and death. We've degenerated. Blacks have made little relative progress from slavery to today because we still have not acquired the necessary source of power to create positive change in our marginal conditions. People who use their individual means to build collective wealth and power understand that there is strength in numbers. Blacks have yet to recognize or act upon this truth. The Black vote alone will not ensure Blacks as a respectable status or a new role in America. The vote must be backed by a national plan of public policy specifically designed to help Blacks achieve economic self-sufficiency and self-empowerment. We are locked into the pattern of vote, 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 and hey, might as well go for the lesser evil. But even if you're going to go for the lesser evil, How do you get what you need from the lesser evil? That's that collectiveness. That's that collective strategy, right? It's Black people working together. I don't even know where this came from. But Black people working together. Black people not continuing to exist in silos. Us not continuing to think of only ourselves and only our families, even though I understand why we're in those positions now where we think like that now, but it's clearly not helping. Power has to be formed. Collective power. Let's go through the different forms of power now. Group power, institutional power, wealth power, numerical power, political power, and voting power. Group power, we don't have. Institutional power, we don't have. Wealth power, we don't have. Numerical power, we don't have. Political power, we don't have. And voting power, we don't have. The only semblance of voting power we have, like Dr. Anderson said, is the power to help another group get their candidate into office. We have the power to help another group get their desired candidate into office. We don't have the power to get our desired candidate for our desired resources and our desired conditions, for our desired outcomes. All of our outcomes, our desires, and our wishes politically are always tied to another group. Are always tied to another group. There's nothing that is specifically for Black people. And then they try to convince us that this is for Black people, but no, this is for another group. And you've tied it and you've just put a Black face on it. And we fall for it. And we have to operate like that because we sign up for it and we lack the power. Imagine Black people going to Kamala and then going to Trump and say, hey, this is what we want for these votes. We got this many votes. This is what we want. What you gonna do? You gonna barbecue a meal, dude. Instead of having, you know, them campaign to us, we should go campaign to them. Hey, this is what we want. But we don't understand power. We don't know power. We don't have power. We've never experienced. We've experienced the powerlessness, and we've experienced other people being powerful to us, but we don't understand power. So we continue to fall. We continue to fall for the traps of the powerful. It's one thing to read these books, because I know a lot of Black people who read the 48 Laws of Power and talk about it, and they try to act like this and that. But I'm like, you're still a powerless individual. Still a powerless individual fighting against another group of people who actually have power. And yeah, you may have a theory of power, but we don't have any experience and practice of actually being in power. Just a theory of power. That's a big difference as well. So remember, like this video, comment, subscribe, share. And if you don't like this video, then you ain't Black. Shout out to Joe Biden. If you don't like this, you ain't Black, right? So that's chapter 2. Power and Black Progress, from 28 to 44. Chapter 3, Impediments to Empowerment and Economic Justice. That's from page 45 to, we're going to run through this book. It ain't going to take long to finish this book. From 45 to, let me see. Chapter 3. Oh yeah, I didn't skip some stuff. I don't know what the thing on chapter in. Okay, from 45 to 64. From page 45 to 64, chapter 3 for next week's video. This week is 28 to 44. Next week is 45 to 64. Impediments to empowerment and economic justice. And remember, today, talk about power. What is power? Power and black progress. I catch y'all on the other side. Y'all be cool. Peace out.